Cool. Hi, everyone. Hello. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight and spending your evening at our wonderful bookstore. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hi. This is such a wonderful crowd. Thank you all so much for spending your Wednesday with us. We are so excited to be hosting tonight's event. My name is Amali, and I'm the events director here at Bookstore Magic. So we are so excited to have Emily Lee Luan and Wo Chan with us tonight to celebrate the launch of Emily's debut poetry collection, Return. But, yes. But before we get into all of that, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. First off, mask wearing is optional but encouraged at tonight's event. If you'd like an extra mask, we have some up at the front register where you checked in. We will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of tonight's discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Emily will be signing and personalizing books at the alcove next to where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And lastly, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of Return online using the link in the live stream description. All right, now it's time for me to introduce the very wonderful poets who we have joining us tonight. A former Margins Fellow at the Asian American Writers Workshop, Emily Lee Luan is the author of I Watch the Boughs, selected for Poetry Society of America Chapbook Fellowship. She lives here in New York City. And as I mentioned earlier, Wo Chan joins Emily in conversation tonight. Wo, who performs as the illustrious Pearl, is a poet and drag artist. They are a winner of the Nightboat Poetry Prize and the author of Togetherness. Wo has received fellowships from MacDowell, Kundiman, the Asian American Writers Workshop, and Lambda Literary, among others, and their poems appear in Poetry, Mass Review, The Margins, and elsewhere. All right, that's all from me. Without any further delay, please join me in giving Emily and Wo a very warm welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Hi, everyone who's online for joining in. Send some hearts. What a beautiful crowd. We are here today to celebrate Emily Lee Luan's debut book of poetry, Return. You're a good audience, you know how to do it. First question, have you eaten? Okay, let me pour you some water. Actually, let me get you some water first. Let me get comfortable here. My name is Wo Chan, poet and drag performer and proud pressmate of Emily Lee Luan. Both of us so happily Nightboat authors. Do we have any Nightboat folks in the audience right now? Yeah, Helena, it's good to see you. Okay, so yeah, let's get some of your poetry in the air. That's why we're here. Let's begin. Start us off with a poem.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for being here so much. I wanted to first of all thank Wo so much for helping host this event, and also all the Bookstore Magic folks. Everybody sitting at the desk back there, and Amelie for organizing, and especially to Nightboat, my amazing press that's made this entire process really a dream. I know it's cliche, but it's true. And Lena, I think, is in the audience. But also wanted to thank my editors, Gia and Santi specifically, and also Stephen and Lindsay for making the whole book happen. Also, my parents are in the audience. My dad's taking a picture of me right now. And I just want to shout out my mom for doing the beautiful calligraphy that appears on the cover. And also throughout the book, and on those little bookmarks that you got on your chair, that's also her calligraphy. So I just wanted to shout that out. And I'm just gonna read for a little bit.
I swam in a cold lake and watched my body convulse on shore. My body, a flight attendant's body, one of the ones on a Chinese airline. I watched them last time I was on an international flight, their skinny arms and flat chests, their clean sense of purpose. I had an aisle seat and they bumped my elbow with the beverage cart, said sorry to me in 2 languages, both of them mine. I thought, I could be a flight attendant, and in another life, I might have been. My cousin is a flight attendant on Eva Air. My other cousin, born 3 days before me, who wants to be a model, tried to be a flight attendant instead. But she didn't get it, said there was too much memorization and she couldn't remember everything. I secretly know I'd be a great flight attendant. I could discreetly close the overhead bins, twist my hair back, tie the service apron on, hand out hot towels, blink my eyes big, say, tea, cha, all the way down the aisle. When offering small sandwiches, I might stare out of one of the windows, imagine the ocean blue. Or say, when cleaning up a toddler's vomit, I might yearn for a less solitary life. But otherwise, loneliness might be okay when surrounded by other flight attendants in the sky. My body, a body made for tending to bodies in flight. I'd breathe in the air of neither here nor there. I'd remember everything about my lives on Earth. The next poem is one of the reversible poems in the book, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit after. It's called She's the Only One Who Hears Me Sing, and you got a little handout also on your chair. It's after a kind of reversible classical Chinese poem where Chinese characters are laid out in a circle, and you can start with any character in the circle and move one way, or you can read it clockwise or counterclockwise. So this is my sort of translated take of that form. This is my own rendition of it. She's the only one who hears me sing. She's the only one who hears me sing. The only one who hears me singing, she. Only one who hears my song. One hears me sing, no, she's the only. Who, me? I'm my only. Hear me sing her only song. I sing, and there's my only hearing. Sing her to only. Sing me into hearing I, who is my only. Hearing why my onlys, she sings. Who's hearing one's to singing? One, the only one, only my only, sing me. The she who sings, hearing all the way to one. She's singing. In it, I hear my onely. Reversible poem in dishwater. He carried me into the kitchen to get a glass of water. He reached for a cup in the sink filled with dishwater. Wait, I said, and opened the cabinet for a glass. Still, he went for the cup in the sink. Why do you want to drink from a dirty glass? I asked. It doesn't need to be clean, he said, but accepted the clean one I held out to him. I held out a clean glass to him. He accepted. He said, clean is a need, isn't it? I asked to drink from a dirty glass. I want you. The sink, the cup still, a glass cabinet open. I waited, filled with dishwater. The cup sinking, he reached for me. The kitchen carried me into the glass. This next poem is a little bit longer, and it's in multiple sections, and they all have the same Chinese title, except for the last one, which is in reverse. The first title translates to what place do souls separated from bodies disappear? And that title in reverse is the place where banished souls have gone, where is it? And that's from a poem by a Ming Dynasty poet named Chou Jing. He chu bie hun xiao. I bring my grandfather to a restaurant on 8th. It's a hole-in-the-wall kind of joint, a pizza place with candlelight. I can't eat anything here, I tell him as we walk through the wall and into the hole. I'm gluten and lactose intolerant now. You can't eat even Shandong's famous beef noodle soup, he asks. No, not even, I say. That's okay, I can't eat either. I'm dead, he replies, and ducks into the bricked darkness. He chu bie hun xiao. My grandfather brings me to the old family well. It's just a cylinder of stones in a yellow field, and the sky is gray. We are in no country. My mother used to carry water from this well, he says. We stand around it, but we don't peer in, and there is a silence, like watching the ocean fold from behind glass between us. Sometimes it feels like different phases of the same sadness, I finally say, and we draw crescents around the rim of the well with our eyes. He chu bie hun xiao. My grandfather and I eat a steamed trout. We start with the meat on one side of the bone. When we finish, we flip the fish together, my chopsticks on the tail, his wedged in the hollow beneath its jaw. As we eat, moving toward the head, our language unhinges. His accent grows northern, bright on the second syllable. Mine dissolves, mouth gone to water. By the time I empty the tender meat of the cheek, my grandfather is tapping rhythms for me with his chopsticks against the spine of the fish. I offer him a fish eye. Together, we chew them to seed. Each of our eyes, in their dead way, swivels and blinks to each other from our stomachs. He chu bie hun xiao. I stand with my grandfather on Wuzhi Mountain. He holds up his outstretched hand. Wuzhi, he says, 5 fingers, so that I can understand. We look beyond the clouds shrouding the mountain, past Xu Nainai's stone grave. Are you okay with being here forever, I ask? I'm not sure I have a choice, he replies, and grasps all 10 of his fingers together. Xiao hun bie chu he. My grandfather and I board the train down the coast. We have our fan tuan, our soy milk. I sit beside a boy my age and we both read books. I imagine we're young lovers in a Taiwanese film, drawing open the curtain and looking out together when the ocean comes. I can see the top of my grandfather's baseball cap a few rows ahead of me. Sometimes he disappears, slouching down to sip his soy milk. We enter dark tunnels in the crowded mountains, and until I see the white sky, I fear we will never surface. When I walk down the aisle to his row, My grandfather is gone. A wad of plastic wrap and an empty milk box. From the train, the ocean, and as we ride, the farther from it. This is my last one. Obad and Milk White. My father used to be a manager at a beverage factory. At the end of the day, when everyone else had left, he'd fill one of the vats with leftover milk and steam it until it was hot. Then he'd leave his clothes on the factory floor and take a long milk bath. Every so often, I remember this story and won't know if I've dreamt it. My father in the milk fog and silver machinery. Those were the days my father ran up debts of beer and cigarettes at the local store, and before my long-haired mother began working at the factory. I imagine his body disappearing into white, his full head of black hair, the first exclamation of a calligrapher's brush on rice paper. Did he long for a woman who could become my mother? Did small sounds in the silence frighten him? I want to inherit loneliness from the scene, but what do I know of my father's dreams? I'm still creating my own mythology of moving water, the field mice tunneling through ice in deep winter. When I draw a bath, I'm usually trying to take myself from sadness and into sleep. And in the blackest hour of morning, my head calls back my body, like the bird that circles high above, singing hui, hui, hui. Thank you.
Let's keep it going for Emily's poem. What a gift it is that we can hold your poems now in one collection. Congratulations on the publication of your debut. The first poem that you read, I swam in a cold lake and watched my body convulse on shore, was my introduction to you. And I had no idea who you were, what you looked like, but we were in a writing group, and that email, your poem, came through in an email, and I read this poem. Oh, and please, if you're in the back and you're standing and uncomfortable, I think there might be some chairs available. If you need to come in closer, take the moment to do so. But that poem was my introduction to you, and hearing it again reminds me of why I read, which is to feel less lonely and to feel connected to people and their stories, and to see other people be connected to their own stories, which gives me an example of how to be in the world, right? So yeah, I think that poems are the first versions of our mysterious selves that we learn to give voice to. I'm gonna start reading this introduction now. And that we learn to give body to the poem in text, and we share that with the public, and we learn to incept that into the private lives of other people, of our dear readers. So to read a poet's debut is to live in the first neighborhood of a poet's mind and their heart. And to do that is to accept discomfort and disorientation, to be surprised by unfamiliar joys, to be haunted by another person's shadow, to anticipate a new local cadence, and to ultimately learn a new way of thinking and feeling through a life, right? And through a book. So it's really my pleasure to be here with you, because this is my favorite type of book, because it's the type that rewards you with true connection and feeling while challenging you to move through the project of poetry and legibility in a new way. Reading your collection Return, I found my eyes doing a new type of dance across the reversible poems, the concrete poems, the haibans and seal script, the traditional Chinese, which I can't read, the ideograms and the pictograms, and my eyes were just kind of zippering from the middle of the poem outwards, and twirling backwards from the poem's finale to the opening, backtracking from the end of a line to the left margin. I often felt my gaze kind of skipping across words reversed, like retracing stones across a river, as if I had dropped something at the very beginning. And I think none of this is an accident in your writing. This book of poetry it asserts to me quite radically not a plea to be understood through narrative, but rather it seems to say, mind how you understand the story, reader. Mind how you understand any story, because it's partially how you understand yourself. And I'm reading through this. I'm trying not to repeat any of the poems that you already said. But yeah, reading this book, reversing, reverting, but never regressing, one is challenged to track the changes occurring in one's own body as the images of the books return, transforming, and are recalled throughout. There is a well in the village where a great-grandfather descends, a lake where a soldier's life is saved and another's is lost, a vat of milk where a father sits and bathes in stainless steel, a hole, and I made a typo here with a W, but I'm keeping it, a portal like the door between Christmas Town and Halloween Town, where the poem asks, how can there be a Christmas Town and Halloween Town parallel to each other, separated only by a door? And yet any East Asian person who has spent time on the playground remembers the jokes and attempts at digging a hole through the earth to find the way back to the other side, right? So at the heart of it, I do feel the book asks in quite a complex way, what does it mean to return, to go back, to return physically or through memory to a place that may no longer exist or never existed in the first place? Memories have no real bodies except for the poems that we give them. In this book, not even footage remains. And I quote, the birthday footage of my grandfather was recorded over, the birthday footage was recorded over that of my grandfather. And when I think of it now, I still want to scream. What some Dickinson scholars may say an irretrievable deletion, but rather for you, the erasure is the bottom floor of the poem. Paradoxically, it's the footage that is erased that is preserved, with language holding every layer of that. And I also just wanted to point out the last thing. I swam in a cold lake and watched my body convulse on the shore. The speaker, who is doing iconic flight attendant drag, this describes my body, a body pretending to the bodies in flight. I breathe in the air of neither here nor there. I see that as a statement on the long-standing legacy of communal care within diaspora, but also that memory is given body in the form of a poem, and you rightfully remind us that the story of the body is not a line, but a story that folds within itself. And so to read your poems is to go into this collapse of memory, of ancestry, of migration, of nation state and history. It's going into the mouth inside the mouth, or rather the collapsing spiral of generational memory that makes a whole person's world. So I'm happy to be here with you.
Thank you, that was so beautiful. I'm like a little speechless right now. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm really happy to be here with you to ask you some questions. The first of which is, what was the original impulse of this book? When did you sit down and realize, oh, I need to make this into a book? What was that thought like?
Well, I think, it might be easier to kind of describe it from the kind of like original image, or like thinking about what is the first image of the book, which is this core image of the well, this like family well that figures a lot into my family history, and also kind of became a catalyst for all the rest of the imagery in the book. And I probably started writing that image in like 2013, 2014. And like, I think some of that earliest image came in like an essay I wrote in undergrad. I was just obsessed with it, and it started to kind of like a black hole or something, started to fold in all these other images of like a void, circling, and it really felt a little bit like the object of loss that ends up becomes the object of loss for the rest of the book. so yeah, I started there, and it did feel like a little bit of a black hole. Every other image sort of was contained in that image of the well.
And following that image, what were some of the questions or concerns that kind of opened up there? I also understand that this book is quite visual, and we definitely need to get to talking about the reversible poem. So it's fascinating to hear that you entered the book through the image. Could you maybe talk about how that relates to the cover of the book, the calligraphy, and the idea of like pictograms and ideograms playing a role in this book as well?
Yeah, so I think it begins with this idea of melancholy, so like the insatiable search, or the thing that you circle without end, like unable to land on a specific object of loss. And so the well obviously is circular in that way. And I was also just obsessed with this idea of obsession. Like there are a lot of poems that are written after Petrarch in the book, because Petrarch wrote like 365 poems to this lost lover, right? So I think I was really interested in this, what happens when you can't land. And the reversible poem, the image that's associated with the reversible poem is geese circling and migrating. And it's a way to kind of capture this idea of homesickness and longing. And the reversible poem, which you can read it all the way down, and then you turn around and you read it all the way back up. And so the poem literally never ends. And it's a process. It like shows you the process of loss, or the process of longing. So all of those ideas were sort of captured together. And then, so I naturally became obsessed with this character Hui, which means to return. And it's literally visually two squares within one another. That center part of the character is a mouth. So yeah, all of these things started to and then there's a lot of like holes and circles and voids in the book in and of itself. So I keep on saying the word collapsing, but all of these ideas just started to rotate through one another, like, visually, thematically, and also procedurally.
Is there another reversible poem that you might want to share right now? I know you read some earlier, but I want to get the audience kind of primed with their ears on how to hear the inversions, reversals.
I'm prepared to do it.
You're not prepared to do it? When you sat me down and walked me through it, I was amazed. Especially one of them, you talked about how you started from the middle of the poem and actually changed it.
Yeah, so I mean, the reversible poem in Dishwater, which I read, the process for that was, initially a lot of the reversible poems I tried to write were really bad, because I was literally just like syntactically reversing it. I was just like, okay, the sentence is backwards now, and that's boring. That's like not interesting to read, right? So I had to kind of think through how I could do it in a way that would change the reader's experience of the initial poem. And so, because the thing about reading the reversible poem in Chinese is that when you read backwards, it's a new poem, and there's a rupture, there's like a new narrative that emerges, and that's what's incredible about it. And so I couldn't think of reversing as syntactically that can't be the only way you reverse. You have to reverse thematically and narratively, and that's almost impossible in English, which we talked about, because English has so many grammatical rules and Chinese doesn't really. So with the reversible poem in Dishwater, I started with one stanza. It's a little bit of a misnomer because I reverse it for you, but I kind of would just look at, like, it's a little bit of a vibe thing, but I'd look at the sentence and just kind of be like, feel that like rushing feeling of like going backwards and trying to like embody that process. It feels kind of physical, of like, I explain it as like a tide rushing in and out. That's kind of like what I was trying to capture. And so
it totally felt physical for me reading it. Like,
okay.
Wait, when you put it out on the page like that, I felt especially when you explained the process to me, it felt like a physical relearning how to read, which I think is amazing because so much of what you were saying about reversing or translating or literally like moving one thing to another spot, I think we talked about limitations with that, right? And throughout this whole thing, in the back of my mind is this idea of like the East being backwards. So, which is just this like the specter of a theme that floats above me as I read Chinese poetry too. So, I think that technique it's so rich in what it touches on.
I also think like in terms of, I use a lot of Chinese characters in the book, and that's like sort of like a personal linguistic project, is like making a non-Chinese reader like look at the character. I really like am averse to this idea of people being like, oh, this isn't for me, like the poem's shutting me out, right? So that was sort of like a linguistic project for the book. And so I think it was also important for me to bring a Chinese poetic form into the book as well, to kind of be speaking to multiple poetic lineages as well.
Yeah, and speaking of lineages, I would love to also maybe just bring in the names of like your influences or people whose criticism or literary writing that you read that led you to put this book together.
Yeah, well, really, like this book wouldn't exist without the scholarship of Michelle Meitai, who wrote the most comprehensive criticism essays about the Chinese reversible form. She's a French Oulipo poet, so really interested in like procedure and like the mathematics of poetry writing. There's a collection called Wild Geese Returning, which I like. That's everything I know about the Chinese reversible poem is through her scholarship. I also looked at a lot of poetry collections that use a lot of different visual mediums or like are piecing together many different forms. All of my poems look a little different on the page, so it was kind of a process trying to figure out how to Tetris all the poems together into a collection. So I really looked at, I'm sure a million people have looked at Solma Sharif's look. I think visually was really informative for me. Diana Coy Wynn's Ghost of. And also this Sarah Ahmed has been really influential to me. Promise of Happiness. It's her scholarship's really directional. Like the way she thinks about affect is about like how our bodies relate to other bodies, like what's above and below us and behind us. And so thinking about like directionality and multi-directions, her scholarship has also been really important to me.
You're naming all the greats.
I know, I'm like, just like the greatest hits. Everybody loves them.
My body was shaking. I actually have a question. Consider this a reversible question. It's the same question phrased two different ways when you're talking about your process. One way to ask is, was there ever a point where you made a wrong turn and thought, oh, and maybe I need to change? Or if you could go back in time and tell yourself at the beginning of this project something you know now about the process, about the writing process, what would you say?
Yeah, this is a good question. I don't think I made any distinct wrong turns, but you all can let me know. I kept on like, because so many of the poems happen in series, I kept on like taking the longer poem about my grandfather that I wrote, I like had like taken it into pieces and then like put it all throughout the book. I kept on doing that with poems. And even when they actually were meant to be whole, I think because I was dealing with so many parts, I was like, why don't I give myself more parts to deal with? So I think that was like something I kept on doing and reverting back to the original for. And then I think because I write so much in series, it feels like I'm like just writing one kind of poem for a very long time, and then I write another kind of poem for a really long time. And I think, I mean, all my MFA friends know what I'm talking about, but I made everybody just read like one kind of poem for like a year, and then everybody had to read another kind of poem for an entire year. And so I wish and every time I finish one of those projects, I'd be like, it's over, like I don't have any more ideas. And I wish I just like had known that like you always find another obsession, you find another thing to write about. And like I wish I'd like calm down a little bit about that.
And a good friend reads all your poems.
Yeah, my friends have read a lot of my poems. Yeah.
Snaps to poetry friends.
Snaps to my friends.
Especially the one that responds within 24 hours.
Yeah, true.
Wow, thank you for that. So I just forgot the next question. I'm just like thinking about all of my great friends. Yeah, so I know we planned a bunch of questions, but there are new questions popping into my head.
Yeah, you should ask.
Is it okay for me? Okay. So this is also kind of like a reversible question, which is, what do you wish people would ask you? Like, is there a question that you wish people would ask you? I know you're pretty early in your tour, so this question might become more clear, but is there a question that you wish people would ask more? Or is there a common misconception about the writing itself?
I mean, like talked about this a little, or I like, some people are like, oh, the poems are kind of funny. Like some of them are funny. And like I wish, and I love that. Like I wish people, because like otherwise, another thing maybe we haven't talked about is like the word sadness and sorrow appears like multiple times, like many times. And for a time I was like only writing poems. I was like insisting that I had to write my sadness into the poem. And so I think there's this like conception, I think some of the poems are sad, unfortunately, but like, yeah, I think people are like, oh, it's such a sad book. I'm gonna cry. But like, it's really, I don't know, I love it when people see the humor in some lines, or like the ridiculous irony in some things. And yeah, I'm really interested in humor in poems in general, especially when they're coupled with like, also devastating things, you know?
I see that to be very true. I cried reading your book and I laughed a lot. And I think that's one of the great functions of poetry, is that you get to have someone to be sad with, and but they're not looking at you, so which is a little more comfortable. And I found great stillness in that sadness reading your book, and that's not a cheap thing to achieve. That's not easy to achieve, and I find that to be such an accomplishment.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, really. Yeah, I heard a clap. It's easy to be a clown, but I think touching on real feelings and staying there with people and inviting people in is so beautiful. I think we are moving soon towards audience questions, but I wanted to ask you just a simple last question, was, who do you hope finds this book? Who do you hope picks it up? Who should people gift this to?
Who should you buy this for? I always say, like, I'm really lucky that I get like 2 languages, and and so, you know, anybody who loves that like in between space, that like really generative, beautiful space in between languages, I think that's, yeah, somebody I would like to gift, or I would like to sit in that place with that person. Yeah,
it occurs to me that this is particularly an Asian American book, because the Chinese is in here, the English is in here, but none of it's translated. So it's the perfect book for a bilingual baby. All right, thank you. Thank you so much for answering that.
I did want to say one more thing, which is at dinner tonight, my dad was like rehashing the story of him taking a bath in milk. And one important imagery detail that I did leave out is that was when he was still smoking cigarettes. So he'd be in the bathtub, in the milk, like with a cigarette.
Icon! We are in the midst of a legend!
So I hope you remember that when you read the poem.
That's beautiful. Oh, second printing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'll
Okay.
change that for
Make
sure.
sure you
Yeah.
change it. I'll check.
Yeah.
With that, would anyone, brave person, have a question for our esteemed author tonight? Please. Do I run the mic to folks, or is there a mic in the audience?
Repeat it.
Just repeat it. Okay.
Oh, Megan.
Hi, Megan. Hello, Megan.
I have a question. I love the discussions that we've had about form and the reversible form. And I know, Emily, from conversations we've had, that when you're first writing a poem or maybe hearing the music of a poem and going to a first draft, from my understanding, you're not necessarily thinking in form. And we've talked about writing in a prose block and then experimenting. So I'd just be curious, like, I guess I want to know, can you talk a bit more about your process from the way you first conceive poems when you're drafting them, and then what that movement into a form looks like, or how you're experimenting and finding the right form maybe to express what the poem's interested in?
So to repeat Megan's question, it's a question about form and process. It's Megan is asking, can you speak more on the beginnings of a poem and how you move it into form via experimentation, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. Yeah, I always write in prose, and I don't line break. And from there, I'll like, it's a little bit like you're given a stone and you have to like make a statue out of it, or marble and make a statue out of it. So I think about like what then is the visual language that the poem wants to speak in, and then I make many versions of it. So I just start breaking lines. I'm like, okay, this feels like it needs to be in tercets, or it needs to be really wide and block-like based on the thematics of the poem. With the reversible poems, I would like start with the stanza and then be like, okay, what would happen if I reverse it? So I have like many drafts of stanza. There aren't that many like strict reversible poems in the book, but I have many drafts of like stanzas that I would just reverse to like practice or like see what it felt like. And they didn't, you just like learn something from that, but it doesn't necessarily end up in like the final poem. And if I work in like a sestina or a pantoum, I'll like adhere to the rules. But other than that, even like sonnets kind of start in prose, and sometimes I like mold it into a sonnet, into 14 lines. But yeah, I think I learned like later on that not everybody does that. I thought I didn't know that people broke lines while they wrote. I thought that everybody just did what I did, I guess.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I've never heard that writing process.
Yeah.
It's so sculptorly. It's like carving a seal. Those seals.
Yeah.
You're making like seals or something. Thank you for that question, Megan. Yes, in front row.
When you're switching between Chinese and English, do you change your sonic aesthetic to the language you're using, or do you keep maybe your sense of like the dominant language's sense of sound?
So the question is, when you're switching between Chinese and English, do you change your sonic sense of aesthetics, right?
Yeah.
Whoa, I haven't thought about that. I think I actually start with the visual. Like I think more about the visual of the character than the sound. Because most of the Chinese in my book is like either found, like I have one poem that uses text from photo captions that my grandfather wrote, or it's like colloquial, so just like, in domestic spaces. So I think less about the sound of it, but more so what the visual can tell the reader. Like almost all of my poems, if you like look at the poems and you don't read Chinese, you can still glean something from the character. And so I'm really intentional, or try to be intentional about placing the characters in a way that that the reader is like able to glean visual meaning from it. So yeah, I think sonics are like secondary, or like I think a lot less about that. But now I'm gonna think more about it. That you asked this question, I really appreciate that.
Thank you. And you had a question right behind, right?
Oh, I was just gonna ask, what inspires your writing?
What inspires your writing?
Oh. What inspires my writing? That's such a simple question, and yet I'm like a little stumped. I think, like in terms of reading, I think I read a lot of like history and theory, or I'd like to read more of it, but that's where I think I'm like a little bit of I use poems to problem solve, like ideas a little bit, and so if I don't have a problem to solve, then like a poem doesn't really come. I mean, I start from the image a lot, which is, just walking around or like sitting on the train, and all of that. But in terms of really like the ideas behind a poem, I feel like I really have to be engaged with other people's ideas. Yeah, I think of the poem almost as like an essay in that sense. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have a couple more questions? I see an arm in the back.
As you think about sort of the family history that you were sort of gathering and researching, what was that process like for you? Was it all sort of stories passed down and shared, and you doing your own research and in Taiwan? I'd love to hear that. It's something I'm curious about too, like with my family.
Yeah.
So the question is, how did you research your family history in the writing of this?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was like my dad loves to tell stories, so a lot of it was like passed down to me. And so a lot of it is like kind of like watery. That's where a lot of the image world comes from, is these like, as a child, imagining the family history and really like latching onto certain ideas through images. That's kind of how my brain works. But in the past like 10 years, I've been just doing a lot of research just about like the Chinese Civil War and Taiwan, and just like looking at the kind of like intricacies of that migration. And so that helps me kind of fill in the holes. And a lot of the book is about the fact that like you can't fully fill in the hole. Like it's not actually knowable. And there's a lot of like fear, I think, in misrepresenting history that like appears throughout the book. But yeah, I did a lot of research. Like I had to do a lot of learning to understand, and I still have like, I feel like probably a really surface knowledge. But yeah, those two, and it's interesting because a lot of the tension comes from like thinking you know something and then reading about it and being like, that's actually like factually incorrect, or was remembered in a really specific way and then passed down in a very specific way.
Yeah. Two more questions? Okay. Yes.
Hey, can you talk about what in the research process or in the writing process got left out of the book, or what didn't make it in terms of like the ideas that you wanted to explore, or parts of ideas, or parts of the history, or anything like that?
Were there any? Yeah. So the question is, were there any parts of your research that were left out of the book or just didn't make it in?
I don't think there were any huge gaps there. There are a bunch of series of poems that I thought I really tried to make work, and they just didn't work in the book. So there were like other forms that I was working with that didn't make, I was like, all right, I have enough. Focus it a little bit. But yeah, in terms of like, I think with the history, I'm like, there's always more that could, that's the whole book is about what is being left out, I think. But no, I think I was like, oh, there's so much more research I want to do, so I can like keep on writing other poems. And that also felt good that there's a next thing I could possibly write. Yeah.
Ooh, Ooh, teaser. Teaser. One more question. Hi, in the back, yes.
Hi. Can you speak to the relationship between, especially in the series poem about your grandfather, kind of fantasy versus reality, things that had happened versus things that places he had not been, but you brought him to, and then we're playing with like, actually he's dead, and how you made those choices?
So the question is asking you to speak on the relationships between fantasy and reality within the prose poem, specifically the sequence with the grandfather and meeting him there in the little shop.
Yeah. My friend and mentor, Wendy Shu, calls it like my speculative grandfather poem. That was like a shorthand because it's like has a Chinese title, so that's how we would talk about it, which is true. Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, actually, I was talking to Tana Bambrick recently about the book, and she actually illuminated a few things for me, which is that, like, that poem sits in the center of the book. And so, and there's this, like, idea of, like, you know, if you, like, travel through the earth, like, who you could meet in the middle. And so it's a little bit of a, like, imagining of that space of, like, meeting somebody in the middle. And so it's necessarily going to be like a little bit upside down, which I guess fits into this idea of reversibility too. So yeah, I mean, the way that I pieced that poem together was a lot of it is just like imaginings, but also a lot of the imagery is like from my actual travel to Taiwan and certain images that I gathered there, in different conversations I've had with like living people. But yeah, just like imagining my actual day-to-day, like going to a restaurant on a hole in the wall on 8th, but then kind of like turning it and making it slightly strange, because that strangeness is like the only way to capture like that space between the living and the dead. Yeah, but I also wanted to be kind of playful in that way too.
And it's so poignant because now the text has a physical body, so it does exist in the world in this way, and it exists in our shared reading or understanding of it. So, okay, I think that was the last question. Did you want to close this? Did you have a closing poem or?
No.
I thought we planned a closing poem. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Thank you to everyone who asked such fantastic questions. Thank you, Wo, for moderating this fabulous discussion. And of course, thank you to Emily for celebrating this fantastic launch with us. So, just a few quick reminders for those of you who are still with us on the YouTube live stream. You can buy a copy of Return by clicking the link in the description. For everyone who's with us physically tonight, if you haven't gotten a copy yet, we've got plenty of extras up at the front where you checked in. I highly recommend, getting a few if they're thin and you can carry them pretty easily back home. Emily will be signing and personalizing books over at the little alcove where my coworker Pax is pointing to right now. It's a little bit hidden, so it'll all make sense in a little bit. We'll just ask that you all line up down the center aisle and kind of curve around to the wall, and please make sure that you grab your personal belongings with you so that we can start to break down the chairs and rearrange the space. And lastly, I just want to shout out Wo's collection Togetherness, which sadly, unfortunately, copies did not arrive on time for tonight's event, but if you want to order a copy through us, feel free to ask my colleagues up at the register as well, and we can help you out with that too. All right, that's all for me. Let's give these two one last round of applause.